Rain poured down in a relentless sheet, masking the sun and shrouding the small town of Pine Hill in an eerie gloom. Over the hills, the steady thrum of cattle and the comforting rustle of corn swaying in the breeze gave the illusion of peace. But on that fateful day, calm quickly transformed into chaos. In the center of it all stood Farmer Jim, a man shaped by the land he worked. His calloused hands had toiled for decades, nurturing the fields that had fed his family and the town. He never thought he would soon face something beyond the wildest nightmares that danced in the corners of his mind. As thunder rumbled overhead, a shadow dashed across the field, forcing Farmer Jim's heart to race. He squinted through the rain, his instincts alert. Distant shouts echoed off the hills, chilling him to the bone, crackling with urgency. Without warning, a group of masked men stormed the field, brandishing tools that glinted ominously in the sparse light. Jim bellowed, voice thick with an unwavering resolve. The rain dripped from his hat, pooling around his boots, but nothing could wash away his sense of duty. This was his home. The masked men did not respond. Instead, they moved with a practiced precision. Their boots splashed through the mud as they fanned out across the farm, eyes darting, scanning for anything they could seize. In the midst of their chaos, they seemed almost like a dark storm, churning with malevolence. Jim's heart pounded like a drum in his chest. What were they after? He knew Pine Hill too well to believe this was an act of random aggression. The land, the crops, the cattle was everything to him. It was not just about growing food, it was about community, history, and legacy. Without a second thought, he stepped forward. "You've come to the wrong place." His voice cracked through the downpour. The leader of the masked men, a tall figure with piercing eyes barely visible beneath his mask, paused. For a brief moment, time froze. There was a flicker of surprise, maybe even respect. Here was a farmer, drenched and defiant, standing before them like a figure from a hero's tale. "Stand aside, old man. This doesn't concern you," the leader snarled, frustration bubbling in his tone. But Jim stood firm, his back straight, grounding himself against the torrential storm, both in the sky and in front of him. Yes, he was just one man, but he had grit and love coursing through his veins. "You don't understand," he shouted, anger mixing with desperation. "This land has seen generations of my family." As he shouted, memories flooded his mind, his father plowing the fields, teaching him how to plant the seeds and nurture them until harvest. He thought of his son, now learning the ropes of the land, standing beside him, dreaming of a future built upon the same soil. The masked men hesitated, but the leader barked an order. "Keep going, grab what we need." In an instant, the masked men surged forward, their intentions clear. They were here to rob. Desperation clung to the air thick as the rain. The tension mounted like a storm cloud ready to burst. But Farmer Jim wouldn't budge. Pulling his weathered cap down, he took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of strength he had. He remembered countless hard days spent in the fields, the weight of each challenge carving a path of resilience through his heart. He stepped forward, heightening his voice. The rain dripped down like tears from the heavens, and with it came a wave of courage. "My ancestors fought for this land." At that moment, the resolve of a simple farmer transformed into a fierce embodiment of something greater, a fight for survival, for legacy, for community. Thunder roared above, drowning out the chaos, but Farmer Jim continued to stand his ground. He watched as one of the masked figures paused, their wild eyes darting toward their leader. Something unspoken passed between them, a hesitation, as if the leader's orders clashed against the unexpected spirit emanating from the farmer before them. "Let's just grab the crops and go," said one of the followers, glancing uneasily at Jim. The leader's frustration boiled over. "You think he's going to let you stop? You think he's going to let us walk away?" His voice sliced through the air, spurring his men on. But the seeds of doubt had already planted themselves among the group. Jim could see it, the flicker of uncertainty mirrored in their eyes. Each moment stretched as the rain continued to fall, creating a tableau of conflict between the determined farmer and the band of intruders. With newfound resolve, Farmer Jim took a step closer. "You have friends and family," he said, his voice steady and low, cutting through the rain. "Don't make them worry." Each word seemed to penetrate the tension, wrapping around the hearts of those men who had momentarily lost their way. The leader glared at Jim, veins pumping with anger, but the hesitation in the eyes of his followers grew bolder. Some shifted back, as if reconsidering their allegiance. Asked another masked man, his voice trembling. "Because the choices you make now define who you are," Jim said, pulling them in. "This land isn't just mine. It belongs to all of us who have lived here, who want our children to build their futures in the same soil." In that moment, Jim didn't just contest them. He challenged their lives, their very essence. It was piecing together the fragments of humanity long lost on that path of greed. The leader, fists clenched, stood motionless, caught between pride and the blooming realization that this fight wasn't just about the harvest. It was about the soul of the community. Rain continued to lash down, but something shifted in the atmosphere. The air felt lighter, charged with compassion as the human spirit began to break through. "Let's go," muttered one of the followers, now edging back. "No, we can't," the leader shot back, but even he was losing grip on the situation. Came a voice from deeper within the group, uncertain yet daring. The thunder rumbled once more, but it felt an echo of uncertainty, an acknowledgement of likely defeat against purpose and conviction. Farmer Jim's heart swelled. This was his chance. "You're better than this," he urged, looking each one in the eye, men sometimes known as friends or neighbors. "You've been driven by fear, by desperation, but we can rise stronger together." Moments stretched, heavy as the rain, filled with doubt and reflection. Jim's steadfast heart weighed heavily upon them all. He could hear the shifting thoughts, the wrestling with the choice of either letting fear dictate their lives or seeking a more honorable path. One by one, the masked figures began to lower their weapons, and the leader's voice faltered. "You can't just." "No," Jim said firmly. "You can let go of this life of fear and find strength elsewhere. Join me instead." Silence enveloped them. The rain soaked through their clothes, but it also washed away the heaviness of ill will. And then one of the masked faces stepped forward and ripped off their mask, revealing a youthful, weathered face, someone Jim recognized. The spell broke. One by one, they began to unveil themselves, shedding layers of anonymity and fear. Friends Jim had known, sons of neighbors, all caught in the clutches of desperation. "Let's leave," one of them finally said, casting a longing glance at the ground they had considered pillaging. And like the swelling tide, they turned away, retreating into the rain-soaked distance, leaving behind an unmarked path, a chance at redemption. Farmer Jim stood alone in the field, heart racing. Thunder cracked loudly overhead, but the storm began to recede. He could taste the rain mingling with the remnants of resolve upon his lips. He had held his ground. A lonely fight became a collective decision, a courageous step toward reconciliation. Even as he wiped away the raindrops cascading down his face, Jim wasn't just soaking wet. He felt something new blooming within him, a sense of purpose that transcribed itself onto his land. This wasn't just a farm anymore. It was a hope against despair. It was a call to community. And as he worked the earth once more, sowing seeds against a backdrop of resilience, he knew that sometimes a simple act of courage could change lives, rippling beneath the clouds, shining bright through the rain. There in the heart of Pine Hill, Farmer Jim had risen, unyielding as the land itself. The sun was setting in a blaze of gold, casting long shadows across the fields of Pine Hill. Farmer Joe stood at the edge of his property, his worn hands resting on the wooden fence. Birds chirped energetically, a symphony of peace wrapping around him. But beneath this serene facade, an undercurrent of tension crackled through the air, a whisper of something lurking just beyond the horizon. Without warning, that tranquility shattered. A low rumble broke through the evening air, growing louder and closer until it sounded like a freight train barreling down the tracks. Panic rippled through Joe's chest as he turned to see, racing towards him, a group of masked men. They charged across the field, shrouded in darkness, their eyes hidden under black hoods, glinting with something dangerous. In that split second, a million thoughts raced through Joe's mind. What do they want? Why here? Why now? He had always felt safe on his land, a place where generations of his family had tilled the soil and raised livestock. But fear rooted itself in his gut as he watched them storm closer, their boots pounding against the earth with a menacing rhythm. Joe shouted, his voice carrying a boldness he didn't quite feel. But he stood tall, planting his feet firmly as if he could become part of the soil itself. The leader of the group, a broad-shouldered man exuding authority and arrogance, raised a hand, signaling his followers to halt. "Step aside, old man. We're not here for you," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Joe's heart raced, but he couldn't back down now. As the masked men looked at each other, fear and uncertainty wove through their group, a flicker of doubt lighting up hands that had come to steal rather than take. But the leader wasn't ready to relinquish control. He stepped forward, determination etched into his face. "We're taking what we need." The wind began to shift, carrying the scent of desperation along with the approaching storm. The leaves rustled ominously, like nature itself holding its breath in anticipation. Joe had farmed this land his whole life, raised cattle and planted crops that fed the community. It wasn't just a piece of earth, it was a legacy, rooted in love and sweat. "Leave my farm and you'll find no trouble," he called, desperation lingering in every word. Joe cast a glance around his fields, noting the ripening corn that stood tall against the fading light. In the distance, his son played near the barn, blissfully unaware of the chaos brewing around him. Joe's heart ached. He couldn't let fear dictate their future. Not for himself and not for his boy. A shift came over the masked men. Joe could see some of them hesitating, their eyes darting between him and the leader. This land meant something to them too, didn't it? Memories of their childhoods or of the lives they were trying to escape. It was as if for a fleeting moment they saw a reflection of their own struggles in Joe's defiance. "I suggest you leave," Joe said, his voice steady as a mountain. Each word hung in the charged air like a challenge. The leader shouted orders, but inside his mask, doubt was pooling. "Would you rather fight an old man than take what you need?" "We all have choices," Joe countered, and the words hung heavily over them all. The quiet that followed was deafening. The intensity of the moment enveloped them like a shroud. Joe felt it too, the weight of every decision they'd ever made cascading around them. He wasn't just fighting for his land. He was fighting for their humanity, a glimpse of a possibility beyond desperation. A young man among them hesitated, quietly lowering his weapon. He looked torn, and in that moment, Joe recognized a flicker of himself in him. He saw that this wasn't just about land. It was about their lives, the choices they made to become the men they were. Choices that could lead them down dark paths or help them reclaim their light. The leader sensed it too and stepped forward aggressively. "You think words can sway us?" There was a low growl in his voice as he tried to regain control. "It doesn't have to be this way," Joe urged, feeling the weight of shared humanity press upon him like an anchor. "You think taking it will solve your problems? I'll help you." Uncertainty washed over the group as Joe's words pierced the night like a beacon. Each man stood silent. Joe could see them wrestling with the gravity of their choices, the harsh consequences of their every move. Outside influences, family pressures, financial struggles, societal expectations, all could push good men to make regrettable decisions. "Take a look around," Joe continued, voice rising. "This land, this farm, it can give you more than you realize. We can work together." Whispers fluttered between them. They weren't just seeking crops, they were craving hope in a world that often seemed cruel and unyielding. Then a young voice spoke up from the back of the group. "You don't understand. This is our last chance. The debts, the bills, they keep piling up. A quick solution paved with wrong choices won't bring you peace." Joe's voice held a steadiness, a promise of something better. The masked men stood there, wrestling with fear and regret. They had come with intentions of theft, but now stood challenged not by fists, but by principles. Joe locked eyes with the young man, and he saw a flicker of vulnerability, a flame yearning to be nurtured. Another man, slightly older, stepped forward, wavering. "I used to run a business, you know. Times got tough." Joe sensed a crack in their armor. "Then you know this isn't the way. We all struggle. None of us are spared from hardship." The leader glowered, but even he was affected by Joe's presence. He struggled against the rush of conscience, anger battling with the one glimmer of humanity left inside him. In that moment, the wind howled, kicking up dust and echoing the tempest of their hearts. Each man felt the weight of their decisions, the life they led that brought them here. "If you go through with this," Joe said quietly but firmly, "you will only deepen the wounds we all carry." Silence fell again, heavy like the storm clouds gathering above. Joe's unwavering stance was met with a dawning realization. This was more than just a farm or a battle over crops. It was a choice to elevate or to succumb. The leader clenched his fists tighter, but the fight began to drain from him, flickering through his fingers like grains of sand. "We just wanted. We're all searching for something," Joe replied, his voice a rumbling growl softened by compassion. "Join me. Let's work together." Eyes shifted among the masked men like a gentle dance of uncertainty. The moment spread out into the twilight, stretching time until the air shimmered with vulnerability. They weren't just masked figures anymore. They were men who had made mistakes, desperate yet yearning for connection. One by one, they started to peel off their masks, revealing faces of the men behind the bravado. Their eyes were filled with shame, but also the light of possibility. "I'm tired of living in the shadows," one man admitted, his voice a whisper of hope. And slowly, the tension began to dissipate. Their backs shifted, muscles unclenching as they collectively realized the futility of their ambitions, how hollow victory could be. They looked at Joe, and in that gaze, the fight melted away, replaced by a flicker of yearning for something better. As the storm rolled in, heavy clouds burst open and raindrops began to pound against the fields. Internally, Joe felt the promise of renewal take root as the masked men stood before him, raw and vulnerable yet filled with potential. Each raindrop whispered a promise of hope, healing, and connection. "Let's start fresh," Joe said, his voice rising above the rhythm of the rain. "We can build a community where everyone has a place." Acceptance washed over the field like the rain, glistening in the darkness. One by one, they dropped their weapons, the tools of destruction, and instead reached for something far more powerful: connection. In that moment, Farmer Joe didn't just hold his ground. He held on to hope, igniting a spark within the hearts of men who had strayed too far. And as they stood together, under the storm clouds rumbling overhead, they became a symbol of resilience, united by purpose rather than fear. The rain continued to fall, drenching the earth, seeping into the cracked soil and lighting a flame within the hearts of those who remained. The struggle had transformed. The masked men had unmasked themselves, laying bare their fears and desires. And in that unyielding moment, among the weight of the storm and the promise of new beginnings, a singular truth emerged. Sometimes all it takes is one unwavering soul to face down the storm, to spark the fire of change. And together they could rewrite their story, not just for themselves, but for generations to come. The sun hung low, casting a warm golden glow over the rolling fields of Pine Hollow. It was late afternoon, a time when the world seemed at peace. Farmer Bill wiped the sweat from his brow, leaning against the weathered wooden fence that bound his land. His crops swayed gently in the breeze, a perfect picture of hard work and dedication. He could smell the freshness of the earth mingling with the fragrance of blooming wildflowers, a mix that spoke of promise and prosperity. But the peace shattered abruptly, as if the universe had decided to rewrite the script. A distant rumble, like thunder but deeper and more menacing, broke through the tranquility. Bill squinted against the sun, his heart quickening in his chest as he turned his gaze to the horizon. There they were, figures emerging from the low brush, moving with frantic speed. As they drew closer, he realized with horror that they were masked men, steely determination etched into their movements. They charged across the field, boots thudding against the rich, dark soil, each step resonating with a menacing purpose. Bill's pulse raced as he instinctively stepped forward, instincts tightening like a bowstring ready to snap. He shouted, his voice rising above the rustle of the wind. The air was thick with tension, electric and charged. At the head of the group, a tall man with a commanding presence barked back, "Step aside, old man." But the way he said it, the tone, the bravado spoke more of intimidation than any desire for peace. Bill's heart pounded fiercely in his chest, but fear had no place here. With all the strength he could muster, he stood his ground. Each word dripped with a mixture of anger and undying love for his land, his family's legacy. For a moment, an unseen force held the air still. The masked men, barely a dozen in number, hesitated. They stood at the edge of the field, caught between the thrill of chaos and the solidity of one man's resolve. Bill could see the flicker of uncertainty flash within their eyes, their masks hiding not just their faces but their humanity. "Listen, we don't want to hurt you," the leader spat out, clearly feeling his control waver. We just need what we need. Bill took a deep breath, steeling himself against the encroaching dread. And how do you think this ends? By robbing a farmer who has worked this land for decades. What you want will only bring destruction. For every angry word he hurled into the darkness, he felt a flicker of hope ignite. It wasn't just a field he was defending, but also a way of life. He thought of his own son, Ben, practicing his swing with a bat nearby. He couldn't let them take away not just his crops, but his son's future. In the twisted heart of the leader, conflict coursed through him like a raging storm. Bill locked eyes with him, and he saw not just a hardened man, but a reflection of desperation. This was no villain from the movies. These masked men were people who had likely lost everything. Just walk away, Bill urged, voice rising to match the tension. You think you're solving your problems with theft? A murmur rippled among the group, uncertainty painting itself across their faces. They shifted anxiously, glancing at one another, the mask of bravado crumbling under the weight of Bill's challenge. For a moment, the sound of the wind whipped around them, carrying the echoes of generations where hard work and resilience had woven a tapestry of hope. The leader's eyes narrowed as he mustered his anger, trying to rally his men. This is your last warning. But there it was again, the wavering. Bill's heart thundered. He had nothing but a few tools and the strength of his convictions, yet the sound of his resolve seemed to resonate deeper than their threats. Bill shouted, his voice a powerful and unwavering force. You don't have to live like this. We can work together, help each other. Silence fell. The buzz of tension hung in the air like a suspended note, leading them into a choir of unspoken regrets and dreams. Bill could see the men starting to reconsider, doubt pooling where anger used to reside. Asked a younger man, his eye darting between the leader and Bill. I mean, it's just corn, right? The leader scoffed, but the hesitation was unmistakable. Bill could almost feel the weight of possibility shift in the air. Perhaps the leader liked to think of himself as a bad man, but in that moment he was revealing cracks in the armor he had built around himself. Listen, Bill implored. You must have dreams too. Stealing crops will leave you empty, and you'll find yourself haunted by this moment for years to come. I know what it's like to struggle. Underneath their masks, he could see the flicker of humanity returning. The leader's tight grip on authority faltered, wavering as a feeling of vulnerability crept in. I thought, he stammered, showing a crack in that hardened shell. I've been there, Bill said softly, feeling the connection in those words. When you feel you're at the end of your rope, when life seems bleak, it's easy to see theft as a quick fix. As the moon began to rise, illuminating the area with a gentle glow, Bill felt a shift among them, a collective realization that they could be more than what they were. It didn't come from anger, but from a place of courage, a chance to redefine their stories. The younger man stepped forward, his mask lifted. What if we just walked away? The energy was changing. The leader floundered, caught between his desire for power and a yearning for connection. And what? No, Bill said, feeling an undeniable strength in the moment. You don't have to drown in hopelessness. There's enough work for all of us. We can grow food together. If you're willing to listen, I'll teach you everything I know. The masked men exchanged glances. Their hardened faces were now softened by intrigue. Bill connected with them on a deeper level, appealing to that shared humanity. Realization washed over the leader's face, the facade of power crumbling away. Maybe. Then let's start building that together, Bill urged, stepping closer. As the night deepened, the masks began to fall away, revealing faces etched with lines of hardship. Boys become men carrying the weight of poor decisions. They were no longer a faceless menace. They were people, each one of them searching for hope instead of destruction. Bill felt the familiar hands of confidence take hold, urging him forward. With that, the tides had turned. The leader took a step back, visibly defeated yet revitalized. He said, glancing around at his companions. In that paused moment, Bill knew change was possible. Bonds were often formed in adversity, and redemption could sprout from the most unlikely places. One by one, the group began to step toward him, faces still illuminated by moonlight but now marked by possibility instead of disdain. One of the men asked, voice shaky yet filled with hope. We plant, we grow, and we thrive together, Bill replied, feeling the weight of generations passing from his shoulders. And as the stars glimmered overhead, it felt as if the very universe conspired to weave their fates together, merging their pasts into a future that would be brighter than anything they could have imagined. Farmer Bill had held his ground, but more than that, he'd chosen to extend a lifeline to those who had lost their way. In that quiet field transformed by understanding, something profound bloomed. This wasn't just a standoff in a moment of chaos. It was the birth of a united community, each soul willing to rise and cultivate hope where once stood fear. Bill watched as the once masked men gathered around him, ready to turn the soil not just of his farm, but of their lives together. And that night, under the vast expanse of an infinite sky, they began to forge a legacy grounded in connection, trust, and the unyielding belief that even in the darkest hours, light can still find a way. The late afternoon sun cast a warm golden hue over the fields of Maple Valley, illuminating rows of vibrant crops swaying softly in the breeze. Farmer Sam leaned against the fence, hands resting on the weathered wood, his eyes scanning the horizon. It was a peaceful day, one that promised an abundant harvest soon. But even in the most tranquil moments, the world had a way of surprising you. Just as he caught the scent of ripening corn, a distant rumble broke the calm. At first, he thought it was thunder rolling in, but as the sound grew, it became clear. Something was coming, something ominous. Squinting toward the far end of the field, his heart began to race as dark figures emerged from the tree line, moving swiftly towards him. Hydraulic engines roared and panic surged through Sam's veins. Masked men stormed onto his land, boots pounding against the ground in a chaotic rhythm. They were armed with sledgehammers and crowbars, eyes filled with an unsettling mix of determination and desperation. Fear gripped his heart, but he knew he had to stand strong. Sam shouted, voice booming over the din, blending with the rustling corn around him. He straightened up, fists clenched at his sides. The leader, a broad-shouldered figure with a menacing presence, halted just a few feet away, surveying Sam with a defiant glare. "Step aside, old man. We're not here to hurt you," he growled, but his words didn't match the cold steel in his eyes. "No," Sam shot back, feeling the heat of righteous anger bubble to the surface. Each word came from a place of deep-seated loyalty to his land, a legacy handed down through generations. With those words, the air thickened with tension. The masked men exchanged glances, uncertainty blossoming amongst their ranks. This wasn't a typical confrontation. Their resolve began to waver in the face of Sam's unwavering spirit. Sam continued, voice steady but laced with urgency. "You think you can take what you want and walk away?" The leader hesitated. Just a fleeting moment, but it was enough for Sam to recognize the flicker of doubt reflected in the eyes of his would-be attackers. The leader barked, but the anger in his voice was less potent now. Sam stepped forward, undeterred and fierce. "So am I. But this land is my livelihood. I've put my blood, sweat, and tears into it. You think stealing will magically change your lives?" They had come not just as thieves, but as men driven to the edge by desperation. Sam could almost feel their struggles, the lives they had lived, the choices they had made. They weren't just faceless criminals, they were people who had suffered and felt unseen. One of the masked men called out, and in that instant it hit Sam like a wave. It was true, within the heart of every struggle lay a fear of failure, a fear of being trapped, and perhaps in their own twisted way they saw robbery as their only escape. Sam shouted back, his voice rich with empathy. "Life is hard, believe me, I know pain, but this isn't the answer." The leader clenched his jaw, anger restlessly simmering beneath the surface. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything," he spat. "Then help me, let's work together." "I can work with you, give you a chance at a better life," Sam urged, feeling the urgency pulse through him. "We can find a way out of this together." For a moment the tension hung heavy in the air, crackling with unspoken humanity. Sam locked eyes with the leader again, feeling a deeper connection. "You have dreams, right?" A murmur rippled through the group. Sam kept his eyes locked on the leader, drawing him in. "Work the land with me. I'll teach you all I know." Time seemed to stretch as the leader wrestled with his emotions. He faced a choice between pride and the escape his desperation demanded. Sam stood resolute, refusing to let fear overshadow his conviction. He was fighting not just for his land, but for a bond that could uplift them all. Another masked man challenged, hesitance mingling in his tone. Sam replied, voice rising above the growing wind. You want respect? Earn it together. Take this moment and turn it into something real. In that charged atmosphere, something began to shift. The leader, reluctant and proud, lowered his weapon slightly. We've never had a chance at anything, old man. You have it now, Sam asserted, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. But it starts here. It starts with you stepping away from the idea that thievery gives you power. When he spoke those words, the masked men shifted uneasily, tension evaporating like mist in the morning sun. They began to see choices where once there had only been desperation. It was slowly becoming clear that perhaps they didn't need to wear masks to hide their real selves. We'll give it a shot, one of the younger men said cautiously, lowering his sledgehammer. But if anything goes wrong, it won't, Sam interjected, urgency spilling over from every word. I promise. Together, we won't just survive, we'll thrive. Sam felt the air change, each heartbeat echoing with newfound possibility. The group seemed to falter in their resolve, masks slipping further down. The leader looked around, a tumult of emotions crossing his face. Finally, the leader stepped over, looking at Sam with a mixture of rage and longing. It's not just about the crops, he admitted reluctantly. It's about making sure we have enough. That's the essence of family, Sam replied softly. Together is stronger than living alone. Finally, the leader lowered his head, and as he did, he pulled off his mask, revealing a face marked by hard choices and unfulfilled dreams. The other men, too, slowly followed suit, peeling away the masks that had hidden their true selves. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a metamorphosis. As darkness fell, the moon rose high in the sky, casting silvery light over the field, illuminating men who had once been strangers but were now united by purpose. Farmer Sam stood there, surrounded by the masked men turned allies, feeling an overwhelming sense of victory, not from a battle won, but from hearts transformed. I don't know what lies ahead, but I do know that this land can flourish, Sam declared, newfound passion igniting his words. And as they stood together, laughter bubbling in the air, a bond began to form, one built not on theft, but on trust, understanding, and the promise of hope. The earlier animosity melted away under the moonlight, revealing newfound purpose in the resolve of each man. Gradually, the fear that had once consumed the masked men faded, replaced by determination and camaraderie. It was the birth of something new, a community forged in adversity, a collective that chose hope over despair. As they began to lay the groundwork for their first harvest, Sam marveled at how quickly the narrative had changed. Their hands, once destined for destruction, were now cultivating seeds of promise under the same starlit sky. Sometimes, it takes just a moment, a single act of courage to turn the tide. Farmer Sam had held his ground, but more importantly, he had chosen to break down barriers, to cultivate understanding among those who had once only seen each other as adversaries. That evening, under a canopy of stars, they planted the seeds of not just crops but of something far greater, a legacy of resilience, community, and hope. And as the earth welcomed the seeds, so too did they welcome each other into lives brimming with possibility. From that day on, Maple Valley would no longer be defined by fear and desperation. Instead, it became a symbol of transformation. Every harvest, every crop shared became a testament to what could happen when one stood firm, not just on the ground, but also in the hearts of those around. A farmer and a band of masked men became partners, storytellers of resilience, co-authors of a new legacy that echoed far beyond the fields, a reminder that together they could grow anything. And in the end, that was worth fighting for. A storm was brewing, but not the kind you'd expect. It wasn't dark clouds or heavy rain that threatened the horizon. It was something altogether more sinister. On a quiet evening in late summer, Farmer Tom stood in the middle of his sprawling field, the last rays of sunlight dancing over rows of ripe corn, golden and proud. The air was thick with the incense of damp earth and the sweet scent of his hard work. But suddenly, a low rumble not thunder disturbed the peace. Tom squinted at the distant tree line, where shadows began to move, dark shapes rising against the fading light. As they approached, the sounds became clearer, shouting, the unmistakable crunch of boots on dry soil, and a tension that sparked in the air. And then he saw them masked men, charging forward, menacing and intent on chaos. His heart raced as they stormed the field, brandishing tools that glinted dangerously in the twilight. Fear clawed at his gut, but he gritted his teeth and stood firm. This was his land, the fruits of his labor, and he would not let strangers take it without a fight. Tom shouted, voice resonating like a distant thunder. The masked figures halted for a second. Surprise flickered across their faces. "Step aside, farmer," the leader growled, a towering figure wrapped in black. Tom clenched his fists, feeling the weight of generations resting on his shoulders. "You'll have to go through me first. I've worked for everything here." The leader stepped closer, his voice dropping low, dripping with contempt. "This land's ripe for the picking, old man." Tom felt a swell of anger rise within him, something raw and protective. "You think thievery will solve your problems? You're wrong. You'll only deepen your shame." The other masked men shifted nervously, their bravado faltering under Tom's fierce gaze. In that charged moment, the storm in the hearts of those men began to mirror the brewing tempest above. Each figure wrestled with their choices, a crossroad they hadn't expected to face. One of the men shouted, a younger voice cracking with frustration. Tom's voice softened, breaking through the bravado like sunlight piercing a cloudy sky. "I've faced long nights and empty pockets, but this isn't the way." For a split second, time froze. The two forces stood face to face, one, a farmer deeply rooted in his land, the others, men trapped in their own darkness. In that heavy silence, Tom felt a flicker of hope ignite. The leader demanded, though his demeanor faltered. Tom countered, taking a step forward, refusing to back down. The group exchanged glances, uncertainty rippling among them, and Tom seized that moment. "You want to fight for your future. You want to put food on the table. Help me instead." The leader's grip tightened around his sledgehammer, knuckles pale with uncertainty. But doubt wasn't the only thing lingering in the air. It was hope, something these men hadn't dared to hold onto for too long. Another masked man challenged, but his resolve was fading, the edges of his anger crumbling away. "Because I believe in the power of hard work over thievery," Tom stated firmly. "Let's do something together that uplifts us all." Air grew thick, and the wind picked up, swirling dirt around them and drawing a line between fear and hope. They were not just masked men in this moment. They were men who had lost their way and were now presented with a choice. The leader shifted on his feet, processing the words that had come tumbling from Tom's heart. For a long, agonizing pause, no one spoke. Just the whisper of the wind and the distant rustling of the corn marked the silence. The younger man asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Tom felt a surge of determination. "Then let's rebuild together. I'll help you, but it starts here." The tension in the air blossomed like a wildflower, unfurling under the moonlight as they began to see Tom not as an enemy but as a lifeline. He could feel their hesitation begin to melt away, the masks slipping slowly from their faces. "Maybe we didn't think this through," said the leader, his voice quieter now, more introspective than arrogant. The younger man lowered his weapon too. "I've wanted to change, but Tom nodded, sensing the heaviness that had burdened them lift slightly. "You're not alone. We all struggle at times, but succumbing to darkness will only lead you back to pain." Gradually, the remaining masked men began to lower their weapons as well, looking to their leader for guidance. He seemed to wrestle with the weight of their decisions, the very essence of what it meant to be a man given the stark choices of the world outside. "I'm tired of living in shadows," the young man murmured. As night descended, stars began to dot the sky, twinkling with promise. The remains of the confrontation faded, replaced by a sense of resolution. The masked men stood before Farmer Tom, revealing faces etched with lines of regret and hard-fought battles. "Then let's change our path," Tom urged, his voice resolute. It was more than just a standoff. It was an opportunity to redefine their lives. As the leader looked around at his companions, Tom saw a flicker of something he hadn't before, hope coupled with the recognition of shared struggles. "All right," the leader said, finally removing his mask, revealing a face that mirrored Tom's own, a face hungry for redemption and weary of battle. "We'll do it your way." Tom held out his hand, and with that simple gesture, everything changed. The fear began to diminish like shadows chased away by the dawn. The men slowly removed their masks, disarming their appearances and transforming their identities from thieves to collaborators. In that pivotal moment, there was no longer a farmer and a group of masked marauders. There were neighbors standing at the dawn of a new possibility. The air shifted again, filled with the kind of tension that comes from choosing to believe in something beyond oneself. They spent the following days preparing the land together, removing stones, tearing out weeds, planting seeds for a future they all longed for. It wasn't easy. The hard soil fought back at every turn. But with each passing hour, they worked side by side, sweat mingling with the dirt's shared commitment to create, rather than destroy. Farmers and former thieves alike found common ground, open to the possibility of hope. They learned the rhythms of the earth, listening to the whispers of nature, discovering strength in unity. The camaraderie built on fleeting trust took root deep in their hearts, flourishing into something beautiful. The crops grew high and hardy, stretching toward the sky with all their power. Occasionally, fear would creep back in, a reminder of their past. But they learned to confront those shadows together, to acknowledge their struggles, ensuring that they didn't lose sight of the foundations they were building. As summer slipped into fall, Tom watched the fruits of their labor deepen richly among the foliage. The harvest was fruitful, not just in yield but in connections forged along the way. Laughter and life filled the air, echoes of children playing, dreams being rekindled. At the harvest celebration, everyone gathered around a long table laden with food, joy dancing in the light of lanterns strung up like stars in the night sky. Farmer Tom raised his glass, a smile stretching across his sun-kissed face. "To new beginnings," he announced, voice resonating and rich. They echoed, a chorus rising in the twilight filled with laughter. In that moment, Tom felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that courage had led not just to preserving his land but to the reclamation of humanity for those once masked by desperation. Sometimes, it takes just a single moment like standing firm against the shadows to create ripples of change. Farmer Tom had held his ground, but more importantly, he had extended his hand, showing that even the hardest of hearts could still beat for something greater. As the stars twinkled above Maple Valley, they illuminated a tale of resilience, a reminder that on the edge of fear lies the opportunity for connection. Together, they had carved not just a path but a legacy, a testament to the beauty of redemption and the light that could shine from even the darkest of beginnings. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden rays across the sprawling fields of Greenridge Farm. Farmer Hank stood raking the last rows of hay, sweat trickling down his brow, but satisfaction filled his heart. This land was his pride, his legacy, handed down through generations. Each blade of grass and groan of the barn had a story, echoing the dreams and toil of his ancestors. But peace can change in an instant, like a sudden gust of wind. With a rumble that reverberated in Hank's chest, he squinted into the distance. Dark figures emerged from the tree line, sprinting towards him with menacing speed. At first glance, they could have been a group of revelers, but as they drew closer, fear settled uneasily in his gut. They were masked, menacing shadows dressed in black, charging across the field with purpose. Hank shouted, his voice breaking the serene afternoon air as the intruders advanced. The tallest of them, eyes hidden behind a dark mask, halted briefly, then laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "This is ours now, old man." Hank felt his heart pound like a war drum. "You can't just come here and take what belongs to me." The masked leader stepped forward, brandishing a crowbar. "And what do we care? We're hungry." Hank's mind raced. Survival, the word echoed in his ears. He understood the desperation that could drive a man to extremes. This wasn't just theft, it was a desperate bid for hope. "Listen, I know times are tough," he said, trying to keep calm. "But you don't have to resort to this. Fight me and you'll lose." "Fight you?" The leader spat, stepping closer. In the face of such aggression, Hank felt something stir within him. The safety of his land pushed him to confront these intruders, but it was the fear he sensed in their eyes, fear for home, for survival, that compelled him to seek connection rather than conflict. He shouted, heart pounding, words tumbling out in a desperate bid to reach them. I can help you. Look, I can teach you how to work this land, how to grow your own food." At that moment, time seemed to slow. The other masked men exchanged glances, doubt flickering in their eyes. Hank seized the opportunity. "You want to feed your families? Come work with me." A burly man from the back scoffed, still clutching a shovel. "Because I lived through hard times too," Hank replied, voice steady. "We can create a future together instead of tearing each other apart. You don't have to be labeled as thieves. You can find a way to rise." The masked men hesitated, uncertainty splintering their resolve. Hank could see fear battling with desperation in their expressions, and a flicker of humanity began to emerge. The young man asked, voice quivering, "Hank, we don't know if we can trust this guy," the leader muttered, still unsure. "Or we can keep stealing and live like cowards," Hank retorted, feeling the intensity of the moment. "But think about your families." In the charged atmosphere, the tension shifted. The leader's grip on the crowbar loosened slightly. For a moment, the idea of cooperation danced in the air, casting a glimmering light amidst the darkness. "The farmer is right," said a new voice, stepping out of the shadows. It was an older masked man, his voice rich with a rough wisdom. "Being a farmer is a hard life, but it's one worth living." The leader's jaw tightened, caught between pride and practicality. "But we came here for food," he mumbled, almost to himself. "But stealing won't solve your problems," Hank interjected softly, sensing the fracture. The older man continued, removing his mask slowly. "You grow some of the best crops in the county." "Yes, together we can succeed," Hank replied, hope surging through him. The leader took a step back, visibly shaken, as if he were wrestling with a choice that could change everything. A wave of uncertainty rippled through the group, but Hank could feel the bond of humanity forming, one stretched thin but eager to heal. The younger man whispered, his mask slipping down as he dropped the shovel. The leader looked around, first at his comrades, then at Hank. He asked, the edge of doubt still present in his voice. "Trust isn't built in a day," Hank said gently, "but you can start by taking this first step." At last the leader sighed, the fight melting away. "Maybe." He lowered his weapon and the others followed suit, hesitantly pulling off their masks, revealing faces worn by hardship and regret. Hank felt a surge of relief, but more importantly, he felt a flicker of possibility. "We'll do this together," he said firmly, extending his hand. As the masks fell away, the men who had come to steal had transformed into potential partners. Hank watched as they slowly stepped toward him, reflecting on their shared vulnerabilities, understanding that they were not defined by their choices but by their ability to change. "Okay, we'll give it a chance," the leader finally said, looking back at his companions as they gathered around Hank. Hank nodded, understanding the weight of uncertainty. "Then we'll all face it together, but I promise you it won't." Soon they set to work. The early days were hard. Each movement forced them to confront their past mistakes. Rocks and weeds fought back against their efforts, but together they found strength, sweating under the sun and laughing through the fatigue. The air filled with camaraderie as they discovered the beauty of hard work. One day, during a well-deserved break, the young man sat next to Hank, wiping sweat from his brow. "I never thought I'd want to do this," he admitted, looking out over the row of corn they had just planted. "It changes when you find purpose," Hank replied, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves. As weeks passed, crops began to sprout, and a sense of pride filled the group. The laughter that echoed through the fields felt like music. They weren't just growing food. They were growing bonds, friendships forged in moments of vulnerability. Eventually, harvest season arrived. Hank looked out at the bounty before him, a vibrant landscape overflowing with produce. The hard work transformed not only the land but the hearts of those who had once come to steal from him. They held a grand harvest festival, inviting the community to celebrate their newfound success. Long tables overflowed with food, all from the labor of hands that had once sought darkness. Neighbors gathered, realizing the journey they had taken together, the power of belief and connection. As they shared laughter and meals, Hank stood at the center, soaked in joy and warmth. He knew they had not only changed their lives but the course of their community. From thieves masked in desperation to farmers that fed families, they had forged a legacy that resonated far beyond the grains of the field. With a glass raised high, Hank addressed them all. "To resilience, to finding strength in unexpected places. They echoed back, the camaraderie spilling over into the crisp autumn air. And in that moment, it was clear that what they had created together was more than just a harvest. It was a new beginning, a story of transformation that would echo through the generations, reminding everyone that within each dark choice lies the possibility of light. As the stars twinkled above them that night, Farmer Hank felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing their bond would carry them forward, not just through the seasons, but through the trials of life. They had stood together, faced shadows, and emerged not just as farmers but as a family, united by the simple truth that when the world seems dark, it only takes a flicker of hope to ignite the fire of change. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, when the peaceful evening was shattered. Farmer Joe was finishing up in the barn, the familiar, comforting sounds of hooves and rustling hay surrounding him. He savored this moment of solitude, the farm being his sanctuary, the heart of his life. But that peace was suddenly interrupted by the sound of shouting in the distance. Joe's brow furrowed as he turned, eyes narrowing toward the field. Something was off. He took a step out of the barn, his heart pounding, and saw a group of dark figures rushing toward him, moving with an unnerving intensity. As the figures drew closer, he could see they were masked men. Panic twisted in his stomach. They stormed the field like a storm cloud rolling over the landscape, chaotic and menacing. Each step they took felt like thunder echoing through the earth. Joe's instincts kicked in. He yelled, stepping into the daylight, voice cracking like a whip in the evening air. The intruders halted briefly, surprised by the boldness of a lone farmer. Barked the leader, a towering figure, his voice dripping with disdain. Joe squared his shoulders, trying to suppress the swelling fear, gripping the handle of his pitchfork like a lifeline. He shouted. Laughter erupted from the group, mocking and harsh. "Kill you? For what? A few crops?" The leader sneered, stepping closer, brandishing a crowbar, its metallic sheen glinting ominously in the fading light. But Joe's unwavering stance reflected not only defiance but a deeper understanding of what he was fighting for. "You don't know what you're asking for. You think I care about a few plants?" The masked men exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering across their faces while their leader continued to threaten. "What do you know about struggle?" In that moment, Joe realized something crucial. The desperation in their eyes was palpable, a mirror to his own past struggles. He took a deep breath, allowing empathy to guide his words. "I know loss, I know fear." He gestured toward the group, feeling the weight of his conviction. The young man in the back hesitated, uncertainty written across his face. He called out, voice trembling. Joe felt a spark of hope. "Maybe I don't fully, but it doesn't have to be like this. You don't have to become thieves to survive. I can help you." For a moment, time froze. The wind ceased its whistling, tension held the air like a taut string ready to snap. Joe's words hung there, a lifeline thrown into the raging storm. The leader shifted, his bravado wavering, and that flicker of doubt spread like a wildfire in the hearts of his companions. The burly man asked, lowering his crowbar just an inch, "Because I've stood where you stand. I've looked down into the abyss of despair and climbed my way back up," Joe urged, taking a step closer, the pitchfork lowered but still ready. "You don't need to live in fear. Let's work together." The younger man's eyes widened as he exchanged glances with the others, uncertainty blossoming into something akin to hope. He asked, voice breaking. "Yes," Joe replied, sincerity dripping from each word. "I'll give you a chance to turn your lives around." The leader hesitated, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. This was a momentary pause, a fracture in time where hope hung precariously like ripened fruit on the verge of falling. He growled, still trying to maintain his authority. "Then you'll still live a life marked by fear and desperation, roaming with masks on instead of finding your true selves," Joe replied, voice firm. The words hit hard. "You all have dreams, you matter." Something shifted. The young man glanced down at his feet, the ground below him reflecting the doubts he carried. "I don't want to steal." Joe sensed the awakening, the cry for change, and he pressed forward. "Then let's move forward. You have the chance to change your narrative today. Let's sow seeds of hope rather than fear. Stand with me." With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, the leader stepped back, clearly wrestling with his pride, caught between the old life he had known and the hope Joe was offering. He asked softly, almost to himself. "I know it can," Joe replied, locking eyes with him. "I believe that deeply." The leader removed his mask slowly, revealing a face haunted by choices and burdened by hardship. The others followed suit, the masks dropping to the ground like fading shadows. This wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about redemption and the courage to reshape their lives. As dusk enveloped the farm, Joe felt an unexpected surge of joy mixed with apprehension. Could they actually do this? But the moment was marred by the lingering threat of the world outside, a world of unforgiving choices and harsh realities. With their newfound agreement, the group began to move towards the barn, ready to learn. Laughter began to fill the air, punctuating the tension with glimpses of what could be. Joe no longer stood alone. He was surrounded by allies, men who had once come to rob him but now sought to create a new life together. Days faded into weeks, and the rhythm of the farm shifted. The men dug up the earth, planting seeds under the watchful eye of the sun. Joe shared his knowledge, guiding them through the cycles of growth, nurturing not just crops but relationships. They grappled with the challenges, mud-streaked and breathless, but smiles began to rise amidst the sweat. Each victory, no matter how small, stitched together their fractured pasts. But just as they began to see the fruits of their labor, a shadow lingered over them. One afternoon, as they harvested the first edges of corn, a series of loud voices echoed from the distance. Joe's heart dropped. "Hey!" A familiar voice barked. They turned to see a group of law enforcement officers approaching, uniforms sharp against the golden fields. The leader of the masked men paled, eyes wide with fear. Joe shouted, his voice booming, authority rising instinctively. He stepped forward, grounding himself in front of the others. "This is a good place." The officers glared, skepticism etched on their faces. One shouted, thumb poised on his belt. Hank's heart raced. They had come so far, and it was all on the line. The lives that now blossomed amidst hardship felt ready to collapse under the weight of the law, and he refused to let it happen. Panic surged, but beneath it was an unwavering resolve. "No, these men came to me looking for help," Joe shouted, fervently trying to convey the spirit that had ignited amongst them. "You don't know them like we do," one officer growled, stepping closer. Joe echoed, incredulous. "Or is it just unfamiliar? I'm not saying it will be easy, but they have every right to build a better life." But as the tension rose, the leader stepped back, fear overcoming his newfound resolve. He turned to the officers, his voice cracking under the weight of doubt. Suddenly, reality hit Joe like a bolt of lightning. These men were grappling not just with their circumstances, but with their identities. If they gave in now, they would lose everything they had fought to reclaim. "No," Joe said firmly, stepping closer to the leader. "You've come too far." But just as he said that, a hush fell over the group, the officers closing in, and their words loomed heavy. Would this be the breaking point? Would the hope they had cultivated dissipate, swallowed by the harsh reality of a system reluctant to change? Joe's heart raced as one officer reached for the leader. Joe yelled, desperation clawing at his throat. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The choice lay bare before them all: retreat back into shadows or stand and face the storm. The leader's breath hitched, caught between the past that chased him and the future that beckoned. And as sirens blared in the distance, a single question lingered in the heavy air. Would the bonds they forged be strong enough to hold against the weight of the world outside? Would Farmer Joe and his new friends truly stand their ground, or would they be swept away in the tide of fear and uncertainty? For all their struggles, the fight was just beginning, and the stakes had never been higher. As the world outside closed in, they faced a turning point that would determine not just the fate of their future, but the very essence of who they would become.